They walked in ahead of me. Mark led as usual. His gait was even practiced, the kind of walk that had once impressed city council members and now carried him into courtrooms like he already belonged. Evelyn followed half a step behind, close enough to suggest unity, far enough to avoid looking dependent. Her posture was exact, slim clutch in one hand, pearl earrings, muted heels. She nodded at a bafe like they were old acquaintances. Laura trailed behind them, one AirPod in, phone in her hand, not pretending to care. We hadn't spoken since the last filing. They hadn't needed to. Their confidence did the talking. To them, this wasn't a hearing. It was a correction, an administrative fix to a small, manageable misunderstanding. They saw me as the problem, and they assumed problems could be sorted out with the right language, the right posture, the right tone. They'd used that formula for years, in family meetings, in emails, in the letters Laura had sent pretending to check in. Always the same closing line. "We just want what's best for you," meaning control. The courtroom was clean and impersonal. Pale oak panels, no windows. The federal seal mounted directly above the judge's chair. It was too high to feel symbolic. It just watched. The clerk instructed everyone to rise. We did. Mark adjusted his tie while standing. Evelyn didn't blink. Laura stayed seated a beat too long before sliding her phone into her purse. The judge entered. I had reviewed her record 3 times. Judicial temperament, formal, strict with time, not fond of emotional appeals. That worked in my favor. She introduced the docket, then turned to the attorneys. Mark whispered something to Evelyn. She smiled. They believed this would be fast, that I wouldn't say much, that I didn't have much to say. That belief had served them well for most of my life. I'd never raised my voice. I never fought back the way they expected a problem child to fight. That confused them. They mistook silence for surrender. They always had. When my mother remarried, I was 19 and out of the house. Basic training had already burned the softness off of me. Evelyn said Mark was a stabilizing influence. What she meant was he had opinions and a plan. What she didn't say was how often that plan moved her closer to his side of the ledger and me further away. Mark didn't like questions. He liked structure, but only when he created it. When I returned from my second deployment, I found my accounts consolidated under a family-managed trust I hadn't agreed to. My signature appeared on documents I'd never seen. The explanation was simple. We streamlined everything. You've been so busy. I remember sitting across the table, Evelyn pouring tea like it was a casual update. Mark, it's all legal. Me? That's not the same as ethical. Laura, you're being dramatic. I didn't argue. I documented and I waited. Now we were here. The clerk called the case number, the full name, my name. I saw Evelyn stiffened slightly. She hated my last name, appearing without hers. She'd changed hers the day she remarried and encouraged me to do the same. I hadn't. We took our seats. Mark's lawyer, James Halpern, opened with a smooth, procedural tone. He described confusion within the family estate and a need for formal clarification regarding guardianship and fiduciary delegation. Evelyn nodded along. Laura barely looked up. Then he used the phrase that mattered most, for her benefit. Not with her consent, not in accordance with her expressed wishes, just for her benefit. I sat still, one hand folded on my lap, the other on the edge of the table. My attorney didn't interrupt. That had been part of the strategy. Let them speak. Let them frame it. The judge listened with the posture of someone absorbing, not agreeing. She scribbled 2 notes. I watched the angle of her pen. When she leaned back slightly, Halpern wrapped up. He gestured toward the documents in his binder. We believe the court will find these financial actions both lawful and consistent with the family's desire to protect her future interests. That word again, protect. I looked at Evelyn. She adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, a small silver chain I hadn't seen before. Her expression was the one she wore at silent auctions, composed, pleasant, assumed authority. The judge turned a page in her file. She asked a simple question. Have the respondents submitted full documentation of financial activity over the past 3 years? Halpern said yes. Then she asked again, this time with names attached. Has Miss Evelyn Grant, Mr. Mark Grant, or Miss Laura Grant submitted notarized records of all asset management related to the petitioner's accounts since 2022? There was a pause, the first real one. Halpern's voice lost half a tone of confidence. To the best of our ability, yes. The judge nodded. She reached for the second folder. This, she said, tapping the cover, is a federal investigative summary submitted by the Office of Military Personnel Affairs, Financial Integrity Division. Evelyn turned toward Mark. Laura sat up straighter. Mark frowned. Excuse me, Your Honor, we were not informed. That's correct, the judge said. You were not. She opened the report and read directly. For the record, over the span of 37 months, the petitioner's accounts were altered without her explicit knowledge or digital authorization. 7 documents carry signatures not supported by biometric records. 4 withdrawals were conducted under joint authorization that was neither granted nor recorded. She looked up. Mark cleared his throat. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it again. The judge continued. Moreover, communications between the petitioner and her family, some of which are preserved in text and email, suggest a consistent effort to minimize her agency over her own finances, often under the guise of concern or confusion. The courtroom changed, not dramatically, but in temperature. I watched it happen. The air moved differently. Laura had gone still. Evelyn blinked too many times in a row. Mark leaned back in his chair, jaw clenched. The judge turned the page. Report concludes, the petitioner was treated as a manageable obstacle rather than an autonomous adult. Her silence was routinely used as justification for control. Financial decisions were made on her behalf, yet without her consent. Evidence supports a pattern of systematic devaluation masked as family oversight. She set the folder down. That was the moment. Not when the words were spoken, but when the silence that followed became impossible to fill. Halpern reached for his papers. The judge didn't give him space. She looked at me directly for the first time. Would you like to make a statement? She asked. I nodded once, then I stood. I stood slowly, not as a gesture, not for drama, just to signal the court that I understood the question, that I had waited for it. The chair made a soft sound against the floor. Laura looked at me like she'd only just remembered I was in the room. Mark didn't move. Evelyn straightened her shoulders, her face setting into that composed maternal shape she used when doctors delivered news she didn't want to accept. I have a brief statement, I said. The judge nodded once. No emotion, just structure. I didn't look at my family when I spoke. I've remained quiet for years, not because I agreed, not because I didn't notice, but because that was the safest option available at the time. Halpern opened his mouth. The judge held up one hand. She is speaking, she said. I continued. My consent was never given. It was assumed. My calm was mistaken for agreement. It wasn't. I learned early that reaction invites escalation, and I've had enough escalation in my life. Mark shifted in his chair. Evelyn pressed her fingers together in her lap. Laura looked away. The judge was watching me, listening. I kept my voice even. I have documentation for every unauthorized change. Screenshots, email headers, notification logs, recorded calls with institutions, signatures that don't match mine, letters marked urgent that never reached my address, requests for emergency authorizations filed on my behalf during times I was verifiably deployed overseas. I opened the folder in front of me and removed one page. I handed it to the bailiff. This is a summary of digital forensic analysis conducted by my legal advisor. It includes IP addresses, access timestamps, and metadata. Nothing speculative, just recorded fact. The judge took it. She didn't rush. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. I could hear the bracelets on her wrist shift. She whispered something to Mark. He didn't respond. I stayed standing. For the court's record, I continued. I have never authorized my stepfather, my mother, or my stepsister to act on my behalf regarding financial, medical, or legal matters. I have never signed a durable power of attorney. I have never appointed them as guardians. The few documents they've submitted that suggest otherwise were produced without my review. Some contain outdated information. Some contain forged elements. The judge turned a page in the packet. Her pen tapped once. Furthermore, I said, since 2021, at least 3 formal attempts have been made to access or change the status of my military benefits accounts through external verification routes. All 3 trace back to the Grant household IP address. Attempts were unsuccessful. I looked up, not at them, but at the judge. In each case, the system flagged the attempt as potential fraud and notified me. That is why I began my own audit. The judge raised her eyebrows slightly, then turned to the clerk. Add this document to the record as Exhibit 4. The clerk nodded. I sat down quietly, deliberately. I didn't speak again. Mark raised his hand part way. The judge spoke before he did. "Mr. Grant," she said. "Please don't." He hesitated, then lowered his hand. The courtroom held a different weight now. It wasn't about tone. It was about alignment. The court was no longer seated around the assumption of family credibility. It was seated around the presence of facts, dates, timestamps, systems. "Does the family have any formal rebuttal?" the judge asked. Halpern looked unsure for the first time. "Your Honor, we would request time to review the document entered. You've had 2 years," she said flatly. "Continue." He didn't respond. Laura was pale now. I noticed her hand was shaking slightly. She pulled her phone out again but didn't unlock it. She held it like a shield. Evelyn's posture had gone rigid. I recognized the look. She wore it when someone interrupted her at charity board meetings when something didn't go according to script. Mark finally spoke. "With respect, Your Honor," he said, "we've always acted in good faith. My wife has supported her daughter, our daughter, through extremely difficult circumstances." He used the word "our" deliberately. I waited. She struggled after deployment. She was isolated, angry, withdrawn. We believed she needed help, not litigation. Did she ask for help? The judge said. He paused. Families don't always wait for permission to protect their own. The judge's face didn't change. They're supposed to. There was a brief silence. I didn't look at them. That, too, was deliberate. The judge continued. Exhibit 4, combined with the Federal Oversight Report, presents a pattern of systematic overreach, unauthorized access, and material misrepresentation. This is no longer a matter of informal dispute. It is now one of legal consequence. Halpern tried again. "Your Honor, we'd like the opportunity to present our version of the events." "You've had opportunity," the judge said. "What you presented was narrative. What she provided was record." Mark leaned forward. "You can't seriously miss her." "Grant," she said, her voice low and sharp, "I suggest you stop talking." Evelyn turned toward me for the first time since we entered the room. "I only ever wanted you to be safe," she said. Her voice cracked at the edges. It wasn't a breakdown, just a small fracture. She meant the words in her way, but they weren't the truth. I answered calmly. "You wanted me to be manageable." Laura made a soft sound, something between a laugh and a gasp. Evelyn didn't correct me. She looked away. The judge returned to the document. She tapped one paragraph lightly with her pen, then turned to my attorney. "Do you have anything to add?" He shook his head. "The petitioner rests." The judge closed the folder. "In accordance with the findings," she said, "the court moves to void all previously submitted powers of attorney, to suspend access by all third parties to the petitioner's financial and medical accounts, and to file a federal injunction against further attempted access by any individual named in the submitted report." She paused. "The court recognizes the petitioner as fully autonomous and competent and assigns no guardianship or oversight. This decision is effective immediately." The clerk marked the record. The gavel did not fall. Federal courts don't need theatrics. Mark's face had gone still. Evelyn no longer looked at me. Her hands were folded tight. Her knuckles were white. Laura didn't move. I stood again. I didn't glance back, but as I gathered my folder, I saw it happen. The image of me, the one they had depended on, changed. Not loudly, not all at once, but decisively. The quiet girl, the manageable one, the background figure who didn't make things complicated. She no longer existed in the eyes of the room. The version of me that stayed silent to keep the peace was over. She wasn't erased, she was retired, and what remained was something else entirely. The courtroom emptied slowly. The clerk gathered documents and practiced silence. The bailiff shifted position by the door, glancing once in my direction before returning to stillness. My attorney packed his notes with quiet precision. We hadn't spoken yet, we didn't need to. There were no instructions left. The ruling stood. Evelyn remained seated long after the others stood. Her posture held, but the shape of it changed. Not soft, not collapsed, just smaller, compressed into something less sure of itself. Mark stood. Not immediately. He moved the way people do when their sense of control has been interrupted. Carefully, as if the floor might have changed texture while he wasn't watching. He adjusted his cufflink, then realized he wasn't wearing any. Laura didn't speak at all. Her phone screen was still dark in her hand, thumb frozen over it. The way a person holds a lifeline that no longer connects to anything. I stayed seated, watching the weight of the moment settle on them. They didn't speak to each other. That was new. Mark reached for his briefcase. Evelyn leaned toward him as if to say something, but stopped before any words left her mouth. She looked at me. I met her eyes for the first time in the entire hearing. There was no accusation in her expression, no apology either, just confusion. As if she had finally realized that the version of me she believed in, quiet, compliant, silent for the sake of family, was not the version sitting in front of her now. She had not prepared for this outcome because she had never imagined it was possible. The silence between us was not empty. It was crowded with every conversation I had let pass, every moment I had swallowed, every paper she had signed on my behalf without permission. "I don't understand how it got to this," she said. Her voice wasn't sharp now. It was quiet, almost soft. I didn't respond. Mark stepped in, voice low but clipped. "You could have come to us. This didn't need to be public." I turned to him. "My silence didn't protect me," I said. "It protected you." His mouth opened slightly, then closed. The judge had already left the bench. The room was no longer a court. It was just a space with chairs and rules and the echo of something that had just ended. Laura stood. She looked at me like I was unfamiliar. Her voice came out quiet. "Were you ever going to tell us?" "I did," I said. "You just never listened." She looked down, then away. My attorney nudged the final folder into his case. "We're done here," he said quietly. I nodded. Evelyn stood up last. Her face didn't move. Not exactly. Just her eyes scanning the room as if looking for something she might have dropped. Some piece of her authority she might retrieve and put back in place. When she spoke again, it was to the air, not to me. This was never supposed to be adversarial. She said it like an incantation, as if the word family could still undo what had just been written into public record. But it was already done. The system she thought would protect her had spoken, and it had spoken for me. I rose. No announcement, no dramatic movement, just the closing of a chapter they hadn't realized was being written without them. They left first, not as a group, one at a time. Laura without a word, Mark checking his phone for an email that hadn't come, Evelyn last walking slower than I had ever seen her move. When the room was empty, I remained just for a moment. I closed my hands around the edge of the table, felt the shape of it, solid, real, not metaphor. Then I picked up the binder in front of me and tucked it under my arm. My attorney didn't say congratulations. He didn't need to. He opened the door for me. The hallway outside was narrow and well lit. We walked in step, not hurried. When we reached the elevator, I turned to him. "Do I need to make any additional statements?" "No," he said. "Everything you needed to say is already on the record." We rode down in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. On the first floor, I stepped out into the lobby. It was cold, polished tile, neutral walls. A security guard at the front desk nodded in my direction. I nodded back. Outside, the sky had changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. The color of late afternoon slipping towards something cooler, quieter. I paused at the glass door before opening it. Behind me, a place where things had ended ahead, the street, the sidewalk, the rest of the day. Nothing had been altered in the city itself. The building still stood, the traffic still moved, but I had changed inside those walls, not through force, through proof. I pushed the door open. The air met me clean and sharp. Across the plaza, I saw Evelyn's car still parked, Laura in the passenger seat, Mark behind the wheel. No one inside was moving. I didn't approach them. They weren't waiting for me. They were adjusting. In the world they had constructed, I had no leverage, no power. I was the logistical inconvenience they had folded into polite terms. Quiet, reserved, respectful. I had never raised my voice in a room. They took that to mean I had nothing to say. They misunderstood me because it was easier than seeing me clearly. I didn't need to win a war. I needed the truth to enter the right room with the right documents and the right witnesses. That had happened. Now they would return to their house, to their phone calls, to their next meeting with their attorney, and I would not be invited. Not because I was excluded, but because I was no longer manageable. That was the word they had used behind closed doors. The word they preferred to say instead of difficult, instead of dangerous, manageable. And now I wasn't. I walked down the steps, each one measured, steady. I wasn't thinking about vengeance. I wasn't thinking about resolution. I was thinking about breath, about pace, about what it means to carry your own name into a room and let it stand on its own. When I reached the corner, I turned. A city bus passed. The driver looked tired. 2 passengers stared out opposite windows. The ordinary world remained intact. I appreciated that the hearing was over, but the impact wasn't. Somewhere there would be emails, phone calls, a new strategy. They would need to decide how to explain it, how to rewrite what had just happened into something more palatable for neighbors and friends. They would try to reduce it back to something they could control. But this wasn't a disagreement. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a federal ruling, and it was written down. What I had said wasn't just heard. It was entered into the system. That was the part they never expected. That was the part that changed everything. The official copy of the ruling arrived by certified mail 3 days later. Plain envelope, no letterhead, no ceremony, just paper. Folded, sealed, notarized. The weight of it was nothing in the hand, but the words inside shifted the ground beneath everything. I opened it slowly, alone in my apartment. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint tap of rain against the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on in sequence, yellow light over wet concrete. I unfolded the pages one at a time, not for suspense, for clarity. The legal language was spare, unemotional, declarative. The petitioner retains full legal and financial autonomy. All prior instruments granting agency to third parties are void. A permanent injunction is entered barring further unauthorized access or interference. Further action may be pursued if violations occur. Case closed. I read it twice. Then again, I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I placed the papers back into the envelope, slid them into the file cabinet, and locked the drawer. It was done. There was no announcement, no fireworks, no apology, just the quiet ending of something that had defined too much for too long. My phone buzzed an hour later. A text from Evelyn. "We should talk." I stared at it. Let it sit on the screen. I didn't answer. The next day, Laura tried. Her message was longer. I didn't know everything. I was just following what Mom and Mark told me. I didn't think it would go this far. I closed the notification, set the phone face down on the table, left it there. There was no satisfaction in watching them scramble, no pleasure in their discomfort. I had nothing to gloat over. I wasn't interested in retribution. I was interested in distance, in systems that protected people like me, quiet people, disciplined people, people who watched, waited, prepared. That was what I had done. And now the record said so. I went back to work that week. The transition was clean, structured. My supervisor nodded when I walked in, handed me the updated schedule, didn't ask questions. She knew enough to leave space. The uniform fit differently now, not tighter, just more settled. People assume legal victories come with banners and speeches. They don't. They come with form numbers, updated access, revised permissions. The systems respond in their own time, not yours. But once they do, it's permanent. My pay accounts no longer listed secondary contacts. My health records no longer shared metadata with old addresses. My military profile was updated to include a formal alert. Previous unauthorized financial access documented. All transactions required dual-step personal verification. My file was flagged for future protections. Nothing visible, nothing loud, just changes, just control returned. I didn't tell my friends. I didn't need to. They had watched enough from the sidelines to understand the shape of what had happened. They didn't ask what the ruling meant. They asked if I was eating, sleeping, breathing easier. I was. Evelyn called once. No voicemail, just a missed call. Then Mark, 2 days later, a local number I didn't recognize until I heard his voice on the other end. "Hi," he said carefully. "Just wanted to see if we could discuss things. Maybe take some of the heat out of all this." I didn't reply. "You made your point," he continued, "but there's still family to think about." I hung up. I blocked the number. They weren't used to losing access. That was what this was always about. Not the money, not the decisions, the access to my time, to my silence, to the version of me that nodded along to avoid conflict. That version didn't exist anymore. I wasn't angry, just resolved. I changed my mailing address again. Quietly, I submitted the form, updated my federal records, and notified only the people who needed to know. A week after the ruling, my attorney sent me a single-line email, "All filings complete. You are clear." I replied with 2 words, "Thank you." No one else in my family reached out after that, not directly, but I heard things from a cousin who worked in a local bank. "Your mother closed a joint account last week, looked rattled." From a friend who saw Laura at a fundraiser, she seemed off, told people she was taking a break from family stuff. From a neighbor back home. "Mark's been quiet lately. First time I've ever seen him not talk over someone." The consequences weren't loud. They were cumulative. Control is a habit. When it's interrupted, people stumble. They recalibrate. Some retreat, some lash out, some go silent. Evelyn did all 3. I saw her once more briefly by accident at the grocery store near base. She was in the produce aisle holding a bunch of green onions. She saw me before I saw her. She froze, then smiled. That same smile she used at public events. Sympathetic, measured, controlled. She took a step toward me. I didn't. She hesitated, her hand tightened around the cart handle. "You look good," she said. "I'm glad you're well." I nodded just once. "I know things got out of hand," she added, voice low. "I wish we could have kept it private." I looked at her. "Privacy wasn't the issue," I said. "Permission was." She blinked. I waited 1 beat. Then I turned, walked down the next aisle, and didn't look back. That was the last time we spoke. There were no ultimatums, no declarations, just the quiet exit of someone no longer available to be handled. I never filed charges. I didn't pursue further penalties. I didn't need to. What mattered was on record. That phrase returned often in my mind. On record. It meant something. Not just to me, but to every institution that had once accepted my family's words over mine. Every system that had assumed family meant safety. Now the record said otherwise, and the record endures. Mark's attempts to revise the narrative didn't hold. Evelyn's social circle shifted slightly. People became more careful in their language around her, less certain, less differential. Laura didn't post about me anymore, not even vague references. She moved on to other topics, other stories, but not this one. This one had been taken out of their hands. I returned to my routines, the gym, the early shifts, the familiar discipline of showing up, performing without commentary, executing what needed to be done. No one in my daily life asked about the hearing. They didn't have to. The shape of me had changed subtly but unmistakably. The posture, the steadiness, the quiet that was no longer mistaken for absence. Once I would have tried to explain myself, to justify. Now I didn't. People see what they want to see until something forces them to look closer. The court had done that. It hadn't turned me into someone new. It had revealed what had been there all along.